His fist connected with her face so hard, the sound echoed off the hospital walls like a gunshot. Blood sprayed across the sterile white floor. She didn't scream, didn't cry out, just stood there, eyes locked on his, calculating, cold, waiting. Dr. Richard Cross, the most powerful man in Chicago medicine, had just made the worst mistake of his life. He'd struck a ghost, and ghosts don't forgive. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how a decorated Marine Force Recon operator ended up wearing nurse's scrubs with blood running down her chin, you need to go back, way back, to a morning in Beirut when the world learned that some debts can never be repaid, only honored. The sun hadn't risen yet. Captain Garrett Kane stood on the perimeter of the Marine barracks, coffee in one hand, M16 in the other. 29 years old, 8 years in the Corps, 2 tours already behind him, classified operations in Central America that would never make the history books. Now Beirut. Peacekeeping, they called it. But Kane knew better. The radio on his belt crackled, static, nothing unusual. Then he saw it, yellow Mercedes truck, moving too fast, wrong direction. Kane's hand went to his radio. "Gate, this is Perimeter 6. We have an unauthorized vehicle approaching." The radio was dead. No static, just silence. Kane started running toward the gate, shouting, waving his arms. The truck accelerated. 50 yards, 40, 30. Kane dove behind a concrete barrier. The explosion turned the 4-story building into dust and screaming. 12,000 pounds of TNT, 241 Marines killed in their sleep. The largest single-day death toll for the Marine Corps since Iwo Jima. Kane came to under rubble. Couldn't hear anything but ringing. Couldn't see anything but smoke. His legs were pinned. He tasted blood. Felt heat from fires burning all around him. 6 hours he lay there. 6 hours listening to the screams of men he couldn't save. When they finally pulled him out, he went straight back in. Pulled 3 wounded Marines from the wreckage, held one in his arms as the kid died, whispering for his mother. The other 2 lived. Kane never forgot their names, never forgot the weight of that choice. Who to save first? Who to leave for the next trip, knowing the building could collapse any second. He saved 2, lost 1. The math never added up right, never would. That night, covered in dust and other men's blood, Garrett Kane made himself a promise. Every Marine he trained from that day forward would know how to make the hard calls, would know that hesitation kills, would know that sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to make damn sure their sacrifice meant something. 42 years later, he still woke up hearing those screams. Chicago, present day. Kane jolted awake in his Arlington apartment at 0430, same as every morning. 71 years old, hands shaking. The nightmare had been vivid tonight. The yellow truck, the screaming, the weight of that dying Marine in his arms. He poured coffee with unsteady hands, walked to his study. On the wall, commendations, photos, memories of 4 decades in the Corps. But his eyes always went to one photo in particular. A young woman in Marine dress blues, 23 years old, crew-cut blonde hair, eyes like blue ice. She stood at attention, but there was something coiled in her posture, something dangerous. The caption read, "PFC Reagan Blackwood, MCRD Paris Island, 2012. Kane had been the reviewing officer that day, had seen thousands of recruits graduate, but this one was different. When she'd saluted him, he'd seen something in those eyes, recognized it. The same fire that had burned in him after Beirut, the fire that comes from watching someone you love die and being powerless to stop it. He'd pulled her file later. Father, DEA agent Thomas Blackwood, KIA 1998, El Paso, Texas. Killed protecting a witness against the Juarez cartel. Daughter had been 15, found the body. Kane had known Thomas Blackwood, had been the Pentagon liaison on that protection detail, had signed the order that pulled half the security team due to budget cuts. 3 guards instead of 6. The cartel broke through. Thomas Blackwood died in his own driveway with a bullet in his chest and his daughter's name on his lips. Kane had carried that guilt for 14 years before Reagan Blackwood stood in front of him at graduation, 19 years old with her father's eyes and the same unbreakable resolve. And he'd seen in her eyes exactly what he felt, the need to make it right, to save the next one, all of them. He trained her personally, pushed her harder than anyone else, watched her volunteer for Force Recon, watched her excel, watched her become exactly what he'd molded her into, a weapon that didn't miss, didn't hesitate, didn't break. Now she was in Chicago, on the most dangerous assignment of her career, protecting a witness against the same kind of evil that had killed her father. And Kane, from his desk in the Pentagon, could do nothing but watch and wait and pray he hadn't sent another person he cared about to die for a cause that didn't care back. His secure phone buzzed. Text message. Package secure, day 1 complete, R. Kane typed back, stay invisible, trust no one. 3 dots appeared, then, you trained me not to trust anyone, sir, even you. Kane almost smiled. Almost. But he couldn't shake the feeling in his gut, the same feeling he'd had in Beirut right before the truck appeared. Something bad was coming, and this time he wasn't on the perimeter to see it. Chicago Memorial Hospital, Monday, 6:15 a.m. Reagan Blackwood walked through the staff entrance carrying a bag that looked like it had seen 10 countries and never been properly unpacked. Because it had. Fallujah, Helmand Province, 3 classified operations she'd never be allowed to discuss. Now Chicago. She was wearing light blue scrubs, hair pulled back in a neat bun, no makeup, unremarkable, forgettable, exactly what she needed to be. The badge she clipped to her chest read, Emma Carter, RN, transfer from Seattle General. Emma Carter didn't exist, never had. The legend had been built over 3 weeks. Employment records, rental history, social media presence, even a fake ex-boyfriend who'd post occasionally about missing her. The kind of deep cover that took a team of NSA analysts and a Pentagon black budget. All of it to protect one man in one room on the 4th floor of this hospital. Michael Brennan, former CIA analyst. The man who'd discovered that Richard Cross, CEO of Blackstone Defense Group, had been selling federal witness locations to the Sinaloa cartel for 8 years. 6 witnesses dead, millions in blood money, a trail of corruption that reached into the Pentagon itself. Brennan was scheduled to testify in 42 days. Cross had already sent 3 teams to kill him. All 3 had failed. Now Brennan was here, recovering from the last attempt, a car bomb that had killed his driver and put 2 pieces of shrapnel in Brennan's chest. Reagan's job? Keep him alive until trial, by any means necessary. A woman in her 50s looked up from the nurse's station, gray hair pulled tight, face like she'd been chewing aspirin. Name tag, Patricia Williams, charge nurse. You the new transfer? Not a question, an accusation. Emma Carter, ER rotation. Patricia slid a badge across the counter without looking up. Locker rooms that way. Handoff starts in 9 minutes. Don't be late. Reagan clipped the badge on, found her locker, and was standing at the nurse's station with 2 minutes to spare. Hands folded, eyes forward, mouth shut. That was the thing about Reagan. She didn't fear silence. She lived in it. Had learned to in those terrible hours after finding her father's body, when the police had asked questions and she'd had nothing to say because her voice wouldn't work, wouldn't form words, wouldn't do anything but scream inside her head. The Corps had taught her to weaponize that silence, to use it, to become invisible, in plain sight. Chicago Memorial Hospital was a beast, level 1 trauma center, gunshots, stabbings, overdoses, car wrecks. They rolled through those doors every night. The ER saw more violence in a week than some war zones saw in a month. But there was another kind of violence here. The quiet kind. The kind that happened in boardrooms and administrative offices. The kind that wore expensive suits and wrote checks big enough to make inconvenient questions disappear. Richard Cross had built his empire on that second kind of violence. And he'd built it right here, in this hospital, where his foundation funded the East Wing, and his name was on the wall in letters 3 feet tall. Reagan had studied his file for 2 weeks, knew every detail. Former Delta Force operator, 1988 to 1996. Exemplary record until Somalia. Black Hawk Down. October 1993. Cross had been part of the raid into Mogadishu. What the file didn't say, what was buried in classified reports that Reagan had needed a presidential authorization to read, was that Cross had executed a wounded Somali prisoner, point blank, in front of witnesses. One of those witnesses had been Captain Garrett Kane, then a liaison officer. Kane had tried to report it. The report had been buried. Cross had been quietly discharged with full honors and a severance package that let him start Blackstone Defense Group. Now, 32 years later, Cross controlled $2.4 billion in defense contracts, had senators on speed dial, had half the Pentagon in his pocket, and had absolutely no intention of letting Michael Brennan live long enough to testify. Reagan checked her watch. 07:15, time for rounds. Room 412 was at the end of the corridor. Private room, post-surgical recovery. The chart said, Michael Brennan, 54, GSW to chest, stable condition. What the chart didn't say, this man knows where the bodies are buried. Literally. Reagan knocked once, entered. The man in the bed was awake, thin, graying hair, eyes that had seen too much and couldn't forget any of it. Morning, Mr. Brennan. I'm Emma, your day nurse. How are we feeling? Brennan studied her for a long moment, too long. The way someone studies a thing that doesn't quite fit. You're new, he said. Transfer from Seattle. Just started this week. Uh-huh. He didn't believe her. Smart man. You know what happened to my last 3 protection details? Reagan checked his vitals, kept her face neutral. I'm a nurse, Mr. Brennan. I don't know anything about protection details. First team got hit in Baltimore. 2 dead, 1 in a coma. Second team in Denver. Car bomb. All 3 gone. Third team lasted almost a week before someone put a rifle round through the safe house window. Reagan made a note on his chart. Blood pressure elevated. Heart rate high. Understandable. Sounds like you've had a rough time. You know what all those teams had in common? Brennan's voice was quiet now. Dangerous. They were all men. Big guys. Tactical gear. Obvious. Cross saw them coming a mile away. Reagan looked up from the chart, met his eyes. So what does that tell you, Emma, or whatever your real name is? It tells me you should rest, Mr. Brennan. Doctor's orders. She turned to leave. His voice stopped her. It tells me they sent someone different this time. Someone who doesn't look like a bodyguard. Someone who could walk right past Cross's people and they'd never see the threat. Reagan looked back. Let the mask slip just for a second. Let him see what was underneath. Get some sleep, Mr. Brennan. You're safe. Am I? As long as I'm breathing, yes. She walked out, the mask back in place. Just another nurse on another shift in another hospital. Invisible. But in room 412, Michael Brennan was smiling for the first time in 3 weeks because he just looked into the eyes of his new bodyguard and seen something that the others hadn't had. Something that couldn't be taught or trained or bought. He'd seen a woman who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. Not pain, not death, not Richard Cross. Those were the most dangerous kind. Tuesday night, 11:47 p.m. The patient came in screaming, 6'4", 250 pounds of chemically enhanced rage. PCP, maybe bath salts. The paramedics had him on the gurney, but barely. We need restraints, one of them yelled. He's been fighting for 20 minutes straight. The patient's name was Marcus something. Didn't matter. What mattered was he'd just thrown an elbow that connected with an orderly's face hard enough to split the skin above his eye. Blood everywhere. The orderly, Dante, 32, father of two, went down hard. The other orderly grabbed the patient's legs, tried to hold him. The patient kicked free, nearly took the man's teeth out. Reagan was charting 4 beds away. She put down her pen, walked over, calm, unhurried. "Ma'am, stay back," the paramedic started. Reagan placed 2 fingers on the patient's collarbone, found the pressure point she'd learned in her 3rd week of Marine combatives training, applied exactly the right amount of force. The patient stopped thrashing. His arms dropped. He blinked like someone waking from a dream, confused, suddenly very tired. "Strap him down," Reagan said. "He's going to sleep soon. When he wakes up, he'll need psych eval and a tox screen." She walked back to her chart. Behind her, dead silence. Dante pulled himself up, wiping blood from his lip. What the hell was that? Where'd you learn that?" Reagan didn't look up from her paperwork. YouTube. She could feel their eyes on her, wondering, starting to ask questions she couldn't answer. She'd been too visible, too competent. Rookie mistake. At the far end of the ER, Dr. Catherine Holland had watched the whole thing. 48 years old, 20 years at Chicago Memorial. Holland had seen a lot of nurses come and go, had seen talented ones, average ones, incompetent ones. She'd never seen one move like that. That kind of precision came from muscle memory, from training, from doing it so many times in situations where hesitation meant death that the body just moved on its own. Holland pulled Reagan's file when she got back to her office. Emma Carter, Seattle General, 5 years experience, good reviews, nothing remarkable, too unremarkable, like someone had built a file that would pass inspection but wouldn't draw attention. The kind of file that intelligence agencies created when they needed someone to disappear into a civilian role. Holland made a mental note. "Watch this one. Something's off." Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. The patient in bed 7 had collapsed veins, heroin use for probably a decade. The other nurses had tried 4 times to get an IV line in. 4 failures. "Dr. Holland," one of them called, "we can't get access. Do you want to try a central line?" Holland walked over, looked at the patient's arms. Scarred, track marks everywhere, collapsed veins. A central line would work, but it was invasive, risky, time-consuming. "Let me try one more peripheral site," Holland said. "Dr. Holland, we've tried..." "One more." She prepped the site, felt for a vein, nothing. This was going to require ultrasound guidance. A voice behind her. "May I?" Reagan had appeared, quiet as smoke. She was holding a tourniquet and an IV kit. Holland stepped back. "Be my guest." Reagan tied the tourniquet, felt the patient's arm with her fingertips, eyes closed, like she was reading Braille. Found something, prepped the site, inserted the needle, flash of blood in the chamber, perfect placement, 4 seconds, start to finish. She secured the line, hung the fluids, walked away. Holland stared at the IV, then at Reagan's retreating back, then at the patient's arm. That wasn't nursing school technique. That was combat medic technique, field medicine. The kind you learned when you had to start an IV in the dark, under fire, with someone screaming and bleeding out, and no time for second chances. Holland followed Reagan to the medication room, closed the door. "Where did you really learn that?" Reagan was drawing up medication. Didn't look up. "Learn what?" "Don't play games. I've been doing this 20 years. I know the difference between textbook training and field experience. That patient in bed 7, you hit that vein like you've done it 1,000 times in worse conditions." Reagan capped the syringe. "I've had good teachers." "What kind of teachers?" Reagan finally looked up, and Holland saw it. The same thing Michael Brennan had seen. A stillness behind the eyes that had nothing to do with peace. A stillness that came from watching people die and living with it. From making life and death decisions in split seconds and not being allowed the luxury of second-guessing yourself later. "Dr. Holland," Reagan said quietly, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm just a nurse doing my job. That's all you need to know." She walked out. Holland stood there for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call to a friend at the FBI, a friend who owed her a favor. "I need you to run a name for me, quietly. Emma Carter, supposedly transferred from Seattle General 3 weeks ago. I think she's federal protection, and I think we have a witness in this hospital that I don't know about." On the other end, "You know I can't just—" "I know, I'm asking anyway, because if I'm right, and this hospital has a federal witness, that means someone is hunting them, and I need to know if my ER is about to become a battlefield." Silence. Then, "Give me 48 hours. Holland hung up, looked through the window at Reagan, who was back at the nurse's station, charting like nothing had happened. Whatever was coming, it was going to be bad. Holland could feel it in her bones. Thursday, 9 a.m., Cross's office. Richard Cross stood at the window of his penthouse office, looking out over Chicago. 56 years old, 6'2", silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of presence that made other men step aside without thinking about it. Behind him, Victor Sands sat with a laptop open. 62, thin as a whip, eyes like a shark. Ex-CIA. The kind of ex that meant he'd done things that would never be declassified and killed people whose deaths would never be investigated. "Database access is complete," Sands said. "We have full patient records for Chicago Memorial. And 3 possibilities, all post-surgical recovery, all admitted in the last 2 weeks, but only one matches the timeline." Cross turned. "Show me." Sands rotated the laptop. Patient file, Michael Brennan, 54, GSW to chest, room 412. Cross smiled. Not a warm smile, the smile of a man who just found the thing he'd been hunting. "There you are, you son of a bitch. How's the chest?" Security footage shows minimal traffic to that room, medical staff only, but there's one anomaly. Cross leaned forward. "What kind of anomaly?" Sands pulled up security footage. Timestamp 0200, the night shift. Hallway outside room 412. A woman in scrubs entered. Stayed 12 minutes. Left. "That's not unusual," Cross said. "Nurses check patients all night." "Watch the pattern." Sands pulled up a week of footage. The same nurse. Every night. 2 a.m. 12 minutes. Like clockwork. She's the only nurse who visits that room off schedule. Everyone else follows standard rotation. Cross studied the woman's face. Blonde. Late 20s, early 30s. Nothing remarkable. But the way she moved, there was something military in her posture. Something disciplined. "Who is she?" Sands clicked to personnel files. "Emma Carter. Transfer from Seattle General 3 weeks ago. ER rotation. Background? Clean. Too clean. 5 years nursing experience. Good reviews. No disciplinary issues. No gaps in employment. No red flags." Cross had been in the intelligence game long enough to know what "too clean" meant. It meant someone had built a legend, a cover story, the kind federal agencies created when they needed to insert an asset into a civilian environment. "She's federal protection," Cross said. It wasn't a question. "That would be my assessment." Cross picked up his phone, dialed a number from memory. Senator Crawford, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, a man who'd received substantial donations from Blackstone Defense Group over the years. "Senator Richard Cross, I need information on a federal witness protection operation currently active in Chicago." "Yes, I'm aware those operations are classified. I'm also aware that I contributed $2 million to your re-election campaign. I'd like a return on that investment." Pause. "Excellent. I'll wait for your call." He hung up, looked at Sands. "How do you want to handle the nurse?" Sands asked. "We don't. Not yet. If we move on her, we confirm she's federal. That brings attention we don't need." "Then what's the play?" Cross pulled up the security footage again, watched Emma Carter walk down the hallway, confident, alert, checking corners without making it obvious. We test her, see if she breaks cover. I'll arrange to be at the hospital tonight. Emergency board meeting. Gives me a reason to be there. I'll make contact, see how she reacts. And if she is federal protection? Cross's smile widened. Then we have 42 days to make her and Brennan disappear before the trial. And I'm betting a lone operator, no matter how well trained, can't hold off what I'm about to send at her. Sands closed the laptop. You want me to activate the response team? Not yet. First, let's confirm what we're dealing with. No point bringing a hammer to a knife fight, or a knife to a gunfight. But Cross was already thinking 3 moves ahead, thinking about how satisfying it would be to watch this Emma Carter, whoever she really was, realize that she'd walked into a trap. That Chicago Memorial wasn't a safe house. It was a kill box, and he owned every entrance, every exit, every camera, every guard. She was already dead. She just didn't know it yet. Thursday night, 9:42 p.m. The radio call came in at 9:42 p.m. Multi-vehicle pileup on I-94. 4 critical incoming, 2 pediatric, ETA 8 minutes. The ER went from controlled chaos to barely controlled pandemonium. Nurses running, crash carts being positioned, blood bank on alert. Dr. Holland barking orders, coordinating teams. Reagan was assigned to Trauma Bay 2. She prepped the space with mechanical efficiency, IV kits, intubation equipment, surgical packs. Every movement economical, practiced, perfect. Then the doors opened and Richard Cross walked in. He wasn't on call, had no medical reason to be there, but he walked in wearing a pressed white coat over his suit, sleeves already rolled up like he'd been personally summoned to save lives. Reagan clocked him immediately, recognized him from the surveillance photos. 6'2", silver hair. The way he moved, that was military, old training but still there. The way he scanned the room, cataloging exits, threats, opportunities. Delta Force didn't leave you, not completely. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Reagan looked away first. Stayed in character. Just a nurse, invisible, unremarkable. But she felt his attention on her, the weight of it, like a sniper's crosshairs finding center mass. What do we have? Cross's voice carried authority, command presence, the kind of voice people obeyed without thinking. Dr. Holland appeared. 4 critical, blunt force trauma, possible internal hemorrhaging. 2 pediatric, ages 6 and 9. Cross nodded. I'll take the first adult critical. Make sure we have OR availability. Dr. Cross, I'm the attending on record, and I'm the chief of surgery, Catherine. The board is meeting upstairs in 20 minutes. I have time to save 1 life before the bureaucracy. Let's make it count. Holland's jaw tightened, but she stepped aside, because that was how it worked at Chicago Memorial. Richard Cross's foundation funded half the hospital. His name was on the building. When he spoke, people listened. When he gave orders, people followed, even when every instinct said not to. The first ambulance hit the bay at 9:47. Paramedics wheeled in a man in his 40s, unconscious, blood soaking through the sheets, vitals tanking. Reagan was on him first. IV access in seconds, blood pressure cuff, leads on his chest. She called out numbers, sharp and clear. Systolic 92, heart rate 108, oxygen saturation dropping. Dr. Holland's hands were on the man's abdomen, palpating. Her face changed. Probable splenic rupture. I need imaging now and an OR on standby. Cross stepped forward, put his hand on Holland's shoulder, moved her aside like she was furniture. I've got this, Catherine. You take the pediatrics when they arrive. Dr. Cross, that's not a request. Holland stepped back. Reagan watched the exchange, watched Holland's hands ball into fists, watched the fury and humiliation flash across her face before the professional mask came back up. This wasn't medicine. This was dominance. Cross asserting control, making sure everyone knew who was in charge. Cross-examine the patient for maybe 10 seconds. Prep for immediate surgery, no imaging, we're losing him. Reagan looked at the monitors. The numbers were screaming, blood pressure falling, heart rate climbing. Classic signs of internal bleeding, yes, but also classic signs of something worse. Aortic dissection, a tear in the main artery, the kind of injury that killed you in minutes if the surgeon opened you up without knowing it was there. The kind that required a CT scan to diagnose. The kind that protocol demanded you image before you cut. Reagan's training kicked in. Her medical training. The Marine Corps had taught her field medicine to save lives, not politics. And every instinct she had was saying this patient needed imaging, not a scalpel. But speaking up meant attention, meant cross-noticing her, meant potential compromise of her cover. The patient's blood pressure dropped another 10 points, 80/40, critical. Reagan made her choice. Dr. Cross, her voice was low, professional. Blood pressure is dropping faster than we're replacing volume. If we don't get a CT first, we could be cutting blind into an aortic tear. The room went quiet. Every head turned. Because nobody questioned Richard Cross. Not nurses, not residents, not other attendings. Nobody. Cross didn't turn around, kept his hands on the patient. "Did I ask for your input, nurse?" He looked at her badge. "Carter?" "No, sir, but the numbers don't support going to OR without imaging." Now he turned, looked at her, really looked at her. And Reagan saw the recognition in his eyes, not of her specifically, but of what she was. A professional, someone trained, someone who knew what she was talking about, someone who didn't belong here. "I've been opening people up since before you could spell scalpel, Nurse Carter. Push the drip, prep for surgery." Reagan looked at the monitor, looked at the patient, looked at Doctor Holland, who stood 3 feet away with her arms folded, jaw so tight the muscles in her neck were visible. Holland's eyes were screaming. Her mouth said nothing. Reagan turned back to Cross. "Dr. Cross, if this patient has an aortic dissection and you open his chest without confirmation, he will bleed out on your table. I'm asking you to follow protocol and order the CT." The room didn't just go quiet, it went dead. Like someone had sucked all the oxygen out, because what Reagan had just done wasn't questioning, it was challenging. In front of witnesses, in his hospital, Cross turned slowly, walked toward her, stopped close enough that she could smell his cologne. Expensive, predatory. "Let me make something very clear to you, Nurse Carter. You don't give me orders. Not in my ER, not in my hospital. Not ever." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his breath. "Are we clear?" Reagan didn't move, didn't blink. Every fiber of her being was screaming at her to shut up, to back down, to stay invisible. But she looked at that monitor, saw that pressure dropping, saw a man dying because someone's ego was bigger than his medical judgment. And she heard her father's voice. The voice from that last morning before he'd gone to work and never come home. "The mission is always people, Reagan. When it matters, you do what's right, even if it costs you." "His blood pressure is now 78/40, Reagan said quietly. "We have less than 3 minutes before he codes. I'm asking you one more time to order imaging." Richard Cross's right hand came up fast. The slap connected with the side of her face so hard her head snapped to the side. The sound bounced off every surface in that trauma bay. A line of blood opened at the corner of her mouth, and before she could straighten up, his hand was in her hair, yanking her head back, twisting her face toward the ceiling. "Shut up, bitch," he hissed. "Know your place." He held her there. 3 seconds. 4. Making sure everyone saw, making sure everyone understood. This was his hospital, his rules, his kingdom. Reagan's mind went crystal clear, cold, combat mode, 12 witnesses. Dr. Holland gripping a supply cart so hard her knuckles were white. A young resident, his badge said Cole, mouth hanging open. Patricia Williams, the charge nurse, staring at the floor. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Because this was how power worked. This was what happened when you challenged someone who owned the building and your paycheck and your future. Cross let go. Turn back to the patient. Prep him for surgery, now. Everyone expected Reagan to break, expected her to cry, to run, to crumble. That's what happened. That's what people did when Richard Cross reminded them who was in charge. Reagan straightened up, wiped the blood off her lip with the back of her hand, and stepped between Cross and the patient. Not dramatic, not angry. She simply placed her body in the gap and stood there. Move. Cross's voice was ice. No. One word. One syllable. Quiet as a prayer and hard as iron. Cross grabbed her arm to shove her aside. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Reagan redirected his wrist, rotated his arm behind his back in one smooth motion, pressed him face first into the rail of the adjacent gurney. His cheek hit the metal. His arm locked at an angle where any movement meant pain. He couldn't breathe without her permission. "Get off me!" Cross choked. "Security! Call security now!" Reagan didn't raise her voice, didn't tighten her grip 1 ounce beyond what was needed. She leaned close to his ear. "You are compromised by your own judgment. This patient requires CT angiography to rule out aortic dissection before any surgical intervention. I am acting under emergency medical protocol in the immediate interest of patient safety." She looked at Dr. Holland. "Dr. Holland, get him to imaging, now." And something broke loose in Catherine Holland. Something that had been caged inside her for 20 years of watching Richard Cross do whatever he wanted. 20 years of swallowing her medical judgment because the man with the money made the rules. She moved, barked orders, grabbed that gurney with both hands and aimed it at the CT suite like her life depended on it. The team followed her. Not Cross, her. Because the only person in that room making medical sense was the nurse with blood on her face and a surgeon pinned under her hands. Security arrived 4 minutes later. 2 guards. They didn't touch Cross, didn't even look at his face. They went straight for Reagan, grabbed her arms, twisted them behind her back, cuffed her wrists. Cross straightened his coat, pointed at her with a hand that was still shaking. Not from pain, from rage. "That woman assaulted me. I want her arrested. I want her gone. Tonight." Bill Foley, head of security, 11 years at Chicago Memorial, looked at Reagan's swollen face, at the blood drying on her chin. He hesitated. 1 second. 2. Then he said what he'd been trained to say, what kept him employed, what kept everyone employed. "Yes, Dr. Cross, we'll handle it." They walked her through the ER in handcuffs, past the station, past the break room, past every single person who'd watched Richard Cross hit her and done nothing. Patricia wouldn't look at her. The resident, Cole, stared at the floor. Only Dr. Holland watched her go. And the look on Holland's face was the kind of grief that doesn't make noise. Reagan walked with her back straight, eyes forward, no tears, no anger. Like the cuffs were nothing, like the humiliation was nothing, like she'd walked through fire before and this wasn't even warm. They put her in the security office downstairs. Foley sat across from her, couldn't make eye contact. "Look," he said, "I saw what happened on the tape. I know he hit you first, but Cross wants charges. Administration is backing him. Legal is on the way with paperwork." Reagan said nothing. "They want you to resign, sign an NDA, take severance, walk away, quiet." Reagan's silence filled the room like a physical presence. "It's a clean deal, Carter. You sign, you disappear. None of this follows you." She looked at him, not through him, at him. And Bill Foley, a man who'd broken up bar fights and tackled knife-wielding patients and stared down gang members in the ER, felt something crawl up his spine that he couldn't name. "I need to make a phone call," Reagan said. Foley blinked. "A phone call?" "One call." He slid the desk phone across the table. Reagan picked up the receiver, dialed a number from memory, not from her contacts, from memory. 10 digits she'd burned into her brain years ago for exactly this moment. 2 rings. "This is Major Blackwood. Authorization code Ghost Actual. I need Colonel Kane immediately. Cover is compromised." Foley's hand froze on the desk. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His brain tried to process what he'd just heard and came back with static. Reagan hung up, folded her hands, waited. She didn't explain, didn't elaborate, just sat in that metal chair with her wrists red from the cuffs and waited like a woman who'd done a lot of waiting in a lot of worse places than this. 43 minutes. That's how long it took. 3 black Suburbans pulled up to the front entrance of Chicago Memorial Hospital. No sirens, no lights. Just the kind of arrival that didn't need to announce itself, because the people inside those vehicles had never needed permission to enter anywhere. A man stepped out of the lead vehicle. Full dress uniform, United States Marine Corps, 3 stars on his collar, medals covering his chest, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star, combat ribbons from conflicts spanning 4 decades. His face looked like it had been carved out of a mountain. Hard, weathered, absolute. He walked through the front doors, and every head in the lobby turned. Security guards stepped aside without being asked. The night receptionist stood up from her chair without knowing why. William Hayes, the hospital administrator, came jogging down the hallway with 2 attorneys flanking him. "Sir, this is a private facility. You can't just..." Colonel Garrett Kane didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge him, didn't even glance in his direction. He walked straight to the security office, opened the door without knocking, and stopped. He looked at Reagan, at the swollen cheek, at the dried blood, at the bruise spreading under her eye, at the marks on her wrist from the cuffs. "Major Blackwood," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. But underneath it was something that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Bill Foley knocked his chair over, standing up. "Major, she's a..." "Wait, she's a what?" Kane didn't look at him. He looked at the handcuffs sitting on the desk. Then he looked at Foley with eyes that could have put frost on every window in the building. "Take those cuffs," Kane said, each word precise, deliberate, "and throw them in the trash." Foley grabbed the cuffs, fumbled them. His hands were shaking. Kane's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Someone in this hospital is going to explain to me, clearly and quickly, why a decorated United States Marine, a woman who has earned 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and a service record that none of you will ever have clearance to read, is sitting in a basement office with blood on her face." Hayes appeared in the doorway, face gray, attorneys behind him looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Colonel, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "Her rank is Major," Kane corrected. His voice didn't rise, it got quieter, which was somehow worse. "Use it," Hayes swallowed. "Major Blackwood was involved in an altercation with our chief of surgery. Dr. Cross reported that she..." "An altercation?" Kane repeated the word like it tasted rotten. "Is that what you call it when a man strikes a woman across the face, grabs her by the hair, and verbally assaults her in front of a room full of witnesses?" Hayes had no answer. His attorneys had no answer. Foley had no answer. Reagan stood at parade rest, steady, silent, blood still on her scrubs. "At ease, Major," Kane said, quieter now, almost gentle. "Are you hurt?" "No, sir. The patient is alive. That's what matters." Kane studied her face, the cut, the swelling, the calm that shouldn't have been possible, but was. "It's not the only thing that matters," he said. "Not anymore." He turned back to the room. His voice filled every corner without effort. "I want the security footage from the trauma bay, every angle, unedited, in my hands within the hour." Hayes started to speak. Kane cut him off. I want the name, credentials, and home address of the man who did this. And I want every member of this hospital's administration to understand something very clearly. He paused. Let the silence do its work. You did not fire a nurse tonight. You did not silence a whistleblower. You put your hands on a United States service member operating under federal authority on a classified domestic assignment. Hayes's face went from gray to white. Classified assignment? Kane's expression didn't change. There is a patient on the 4th floor of this hospital who is under federal witness protection. Major Blackwood was placed here to ensure that patient's safety. Her cover, her identity, and her mission were classified at the highest level. He looked at each person in the room, one by one. Your chief of surgery just compromised a federal operation, and as of right now, every decision this hospital makes goes through me. Somewhere upstairs, in his corner office, adjusting his white coat and rehearsing the speech he'd give to the board about the unstable nurse he'd had removed, Dr. Richard Cross had no idea that the ground beneath his entire world had just opened up. The quiet woman he'd slapped was not who he thought she was. The war he just started was not one he could fight, and the power he believed made him untouchable had just met something it had never encountered before. Someone who wasn't afraid of it. Someone who'd been trained to hunt men exactly like him. Someone who'd just been given authorization to finish what she'd started. Colonel Kane looked at Reagan. You have 48 hours, Major. Use them. Reagan's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Yes, sir. The ghost had been made. The mask was off. The war was on. And Richard Cross was about to learn that some predators hunt in silence until the exact moment they're ready to strike. That moment was now. Part 2. The Reckoning. Kane hadn't left the building. It was past midnight now, and he stood in the hospital administrator's office with his hands behind his back, looking at the framed photographs on the wall. Cross shaking hands with the governor. Cross cutting the ribbon on the East Wing. Cross smiling with a donation check the size of a dining table. Kane studied each one the way a detective studies a crime scene, because that's what this was. A crime scene. It had been for years. They just hadn't known it yet. William Hayes sat behind his desk with sweat running down the side of his neck. 2 attorneys flanked him. Neither one had said a word in 11 minutes because neither one had any idea what to say. Let me understand the situation, Kane said without turning around. Your chief of surgery physically assaulted an active-duty military officer in front of a dozen witnesses, and your institution's first response was to handcuff the victim and prepare termination paperwork. Colonel Kane, there are 2 sides to every... I've seen the footage, Mr. Hayes. Kane turned now. His eyes were the kind of calm that precedes destruction. There is one side. Your surgeon struck a woman across the face. He grabbed her by the hair. He called her a bitch. Then when she restrained him to save a patient's life, your security team arrested her instead of him. Kane paused. Let that sit in the air like smoke. Those are facts. If you'd like to offer me a different interpretation, I'd advise you to think very carefully before you do. Hayes looked at his attorneys. The older one, a woman named Patricia Pratt, gave the smallest shake of her head. Don't engage. Where is Major Blackwood now? Kane asked. She's in the staff lounge on the 1st floor. You provided nothing. Kane's voice could have cut glass. My team is with her. I'm asking because I want to know that nobody from this hospital has approached her, offered her anything, or asked her to sign anything since I arrived. Hayes hesitated. 1 second too long. Kane's eyes narrowed. What did you do? Our legal team may have, prior to your arrival, presented a standard separation agreement. It's routine in cases of workplace. An NDA. Kane said it like a diagnosis. You tried to buy her silence. It was standard procedure, Colonel. You didn't know she was military, so you thought it was acceptable to silence a civilian woman who'd been assaulted by her superior. Kane let that sit. Let Hayes really hear what he just admitted. That's actually worse, Mr. Hayes. You understand that, don't you? Hayes had no answer. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. Kane pulled a chair from the corner of the room, set it in front of the desk, sat down. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Here's what's going to happen, and I want you to listen to every word because I will not repeat myself. The room went still. Major Blackwood is on a classified federal assignment. The nature of that assignment is not your concern. What is your concern is that her cover has been compromised by the actions of your employee. That compromise puts a federal witness at risk. It puts Major Blackwood at risk. And it puts this hospital in a position that your attorneys are not equipped to navigate. Pratt, the senior attorney, finally spoke. Colonel, with all due respect, we'll need to verify. Call the Pentagon. Kane didn't blink. Ask for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Give them Major Blackwood's service number. I'll wait. Pratt didn't move. That's what Kane thought. Now, Kane continued, I need 3 things from this hospital tonight. First, the complete and unedited security footage from every camera covering the trauma bay, the hallways, and this office. Second, all internal communications regarding Dr. Cross's conduct, including any prior complaints, HR filings, incident reports, or settlement agreements. Third, the name of every person in that trauma bay tonight who witnessed the assault. Hayes gripped the arms of his chair. Colonel, some of those records are protected by hospital policy and attorney-client. Mr. Hayes. Kane's voice dropped so low it barely carried across the desk. A federal officer was assaulted on duty. That makes this a federal matter. You can hand me those records voluntarily tonight, or a team of JAG attorneys and federal investigators will be in this building at 0800 tomorrow morning with subpoenas that will open every file cabinet, every server, and every locked drawer in this hospital. Kane leaned back slightly. Your choice. Make it now. Hayes looked at Pratt. Pratt closed her eyes, nodded once. We'll get you the footage, Hayes said quietly. Tonight. Smart decision, Kane said. Your first one tonight. He stood, walked to the door, stopped. One more thing. If Dr. Cross attempts to leave the state, or if any evidence related to this incident mysteriously disappears, I will personally ensure that every person in this administrative chain faces federal obstruction charges. Do we understand each other? Hayes nodded, couldn't speak. Kane left without another word. Down the hallway, in a conference room that had been converted into a temporary command post, Reagan sat with 2 Marines in civilian clothes standing by the door. She'd cleaned the blood off her face. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the bruise under her eye was darkening by the hour. She held a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The door opened. Kane walked in alone. He pulled a chair across from her. Talk to me, Rex. She looked at him, not as a subordinate to a commanding officer, as a person who trusted another person. The witness is stable. 4th floor, room 412, post-surgical recovery from a gunshot wound sustained 11 days ago. His identity is intact. No one in this hospital knows who he is or why he's here. My cover was designed to hold for another 6 weeks until he could be safely transferred. And now? And now the chief of surgery decided to make a scene in front of 12 witnesses, and I had to choose between maintaining cover and saving a patient's life. Kane studied her. He'd known Reagan Blackwood for 13 years, had watched her complete Force Recon training, had read the classified reports from 3 combat deployments that would never make the news, had pinned medals to her chest, had written the recommendation that got her recruited into JSOC. He knew exactly who she was and exactly what she was capable of. And he also knew that beneath the training, beneath the discipline, beneath the steel, there was a woman who'd just been hit in the face by a man twice her political power and paraded through a hospital in handcuffs. How are you doing? He asked, not as a colonel, as someone who cared. Reagan set the coffee down slowly. Her jaw tightened just slightly. The bruise on her face had deepened to purple, spreading across her cheekbone like spilled ink. "I've been hit harder, sir. I've been in worse situations." She looked up, met his eyes. "But this is different. He didn't hit me because I was a threat. He hit me because he thought I was nothing. He hit me because every woman in that hospital has taught him he could. That's not on them." "No, sir. It's on the system that made them afraid to speak." Kane nodded slowly. "DOD wants to extract you, pull you off the assignment, reassign the witness to a federal facility." Reagan's eyes hardened. "And the nurses who work here? The ones who watched tonight? The ones who've been watching for years? Who extracts them?" Kane looked at her for a long time. "What are you asking me, Major?" "I'm asking to stay. Your cover is blown. My cover as a nurse is blown. My mission isn't finished." "The mission was the witness." "The mission is always people, sir." She leaned forward. "That's what you taught me. Brennan is one person. But there are dozens of staff in this hospital who've been victims of Cross's system. If I walk away now, nothing changes. He gets fired maybe, takes a severance package, opens a practice somewhere else, does it again." Kane rubbed his jaw. He looked at the ceiling, exhaled through his nose like a man who already knew the answer he was going to give and wished he didn't. 72 hours, he said. "I'll hold DOD off for 72 hours. After that, I can't protect your position here. I don't need 72 hours. How many do you need?" 48. "For what?" Reagan picked up her coffee, took her first sip, set it back down. "For the truth to come out." One floor above them, Richard Cross paced his office. The door locked, the lights off. Only the city glow through the window illuminating his face. His hands were shaking, not from guilt, Cross didn't do guilt, but from something he hadn't felt in 30 years. The tremor of a man realizing the ground beneath him was no longer solid. He'd called his personal attorney, Victor Sands, at 12:15 in the morning. Sands had answered on the second ring because when Richard Cross called, you answered. "She assaulted me, Victor, in front of everyone. I want her prosecuted. I want her license pulled. I want her destroyed." "Richard, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened." "A nurse challenged me during a procedure. I corrected her. She put her hands on me, physically restrained me in my own trauma bay." "When you say you corrected her," "I put her in her place, Victor, that's all. She escalated." "Did anyone see this correction?" "Everyone saw it, that's the point. She humiliated me." "Richard," Sands's voice changed, got careful. "I need you to be very specific. When you say you corrected her, did you touch her?" Silence. "Richard." "I may have. I grabbed her arm to move her out of the way. She was interfering with a surgical decision." "Did you hit her?" "She was in my face, Victor. She wouldn't shut up. She was undermining me in front of my entire team." "Did you hit her?" "It wasn't. It was a reaction. She provoked me." Sands went quiet for 10 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was flat. "Is there footage?" "There are cameras in every trauma bay. It's a hospital." "Then we have a problem." "I don't have a problem. She attacked me. I'm the victim here." "Richard, if there's footage of you striking a female employee, it doesn't matter what she did after. You're the chief of surgery. She's a nurse. The optics alone." "I don't care about optics. I care about making sure that woman never works in medicine again." Sands took a breath. "There's something else you need to know. I got a call 10 minutes ago from someone at the hospital. They said a military officer showed up tonight, a Marine colonel, 3 stars. He's apparently claiming this nurse is some kind of active duty service member." Dead silence. "That's insane," Cross said. "She's a nurse. She's nobody." "Well, a 3-star colonel just walked into your hospital at midnight for nobody, Richard. Something doesn't add up." Cross paced his office. His mind was racing. "It's a bluff. She's trying to scare us." A Marine colonel in full dress uniform is not a bluff. It doesn't matter who she is. She put her hands on me. That's assault. Military or not, she assaulted a civilian. And if the footage shows you hitting her first, then we need to make sure the right footage gets seen. Cross stopped pacing. What do you mean? Hayes controls the security system. He's done it before. Sands paused. What do you mean he's done it before? Forget it. Just handle this, Victor. That's what I pay you for. Richard, if you're asking me to, I'm asking you to protect me like you always do. Sands hung up. Cross put his phone on the desk, stared at the wall. For the first time in years, something cold moved through his chest. Not fear, not exactly, but the dim, distant recognition that something had shifted tonight, that the rules he'd always played by might not hold. He shook it off. He'd survived worse. Survived complaints, lawsuits, investigations. He'd survived because this hospital needed him more than it needed the truth. That had always been enough. His phone rang. Senator Crawford, chairman of the Armed Services Committee. Senator, Richard, I got your message. I made some calls. You were right. There is a federal witness protection operation active in Chicago. Cross smiled. I knew it. Who's the witness? I don't have a name. That's classified above my clearance. But I can tell you the operation is being run out of JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. That means whoever that nurse is, she's not just military. She's Tier 1, Special Operations. Cross's smile faded. What kind of special operations? The kind that doesn't exist on paper. The kind that has presidential authorization. Richard, if you've compromised one of their operations, this isn't going to go away with lawyers and donations. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to be very, very careful, because JSOC doesn't play by normal rules. And if that woman you hit is one of theirs, they will burn this hospital to the ground to protect her. The senator hung up. Cross sat in his chair. For the first time in 30 years, Richard Cross felt something he'd spent his entire career making other people feel. Something he'd inflicted on residents and nurses and anyone who dared to challenge his authority. Fear. Real fear. The kind that crawls up your spine and whispers that maybe, just maybe, you're not as untouchable as you thought. At 6:47 the next morning, Reagan walked back into the ER. She was wearing clean scrubs. The bruise on her face was visible. She made no effort to hide it. Her badge still said, Emma Carter, RN. She clipped it to her chest and walked to the nurse's station like it was any other Friday morning. Patricia Williams saw her first. Patricia's hands stopped moving over the keyboard. Her eyes went to the bruise, then away. You're here, Patricia said. It wasn't a question, just a statement of disbelief. I'm on the schedule, Reagan answered. Carter, after last night, I didn't think. Am I on the schedule, Patricia? Patricia looked at her computer. Yes, you're on. Then I'm here. Reagan picked up her patient charts, started her rounds. The ER went through something strange that morning. It was like a current running under the floor. Every nurse, every tech, every resident who'd been in that trauma bay the night before knew two things. They knew what Cross had done, and they knew what Reagan had done. And now they knew something else. Something that had spread through the hospital grapevine between midnight and dawn like wildfire. She was military. Not just military, special operations, Marine Force Recon. The whispers moved through the hallways like smoke. Navy SEAL, some said. Delta Force, others claimed. The details didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet nurse who ate lunch alone and took down a PCP patient with 2 fingers was a combat-decorated Special Forces operator. And she'd come back. After being hit, after being cuffed, after being humiliated, she'd walked back in like nothing had happened. The young resident, Jason Cole, found Reagan restocking a supply cart at 8:15. He stood there for 30 seconds before she acknowledged him. Dr. Cole, I wanted to say, He couldn't get the words out. His eyes were red. He'd been crying. "Last night when he hit you, I should have done something. I just stood there. I watched and I didn't." "Jason." Her voice was kind. Not soft, kind. "There's a difference." "How old are you?" 27. "How long have you been at Chicago Memorial?" 4 months. "And in those 4 months, how many times have you seen someone challenge Dr. Cross?" Jason looked at the floor. "Never. Because the system taught you not to. That's not cowardice. That's survival. Don't carry guilt for a problem you didn't create." "But you did it. You stood up to him." "I had training you didn't have, and I had information you didn't have. The playing field was never even, Jason. It's not your fault." He wiped his eyes. "Is it true, what they're saying, that you're—" "What matters right now is that we have patients who need care. That's what we do. That's what today is about." Jason nodded. He walked away. But something had changed in the way he carried himself. His shoulders were slightly higher, his jaw slightly firmer. It was a small thing, but small things are how change begins. At 9:30, Hayes called an emergency board meeting. By 10:15, Richard Cross's personal attorney was in a conference room on the 3rd floor, demanding access to the security footage. By 11, a hospital PR consultant had been called in to manage what they were already calling the incident. And at 11:45, something happened that nobody in the administration had planned for. Dr. Catherine Holland walked into Hayes's office, closed the door, sat down without being invited. "I want to make a formal statement," she said. Hayes looked up from his phone. "Catherine, this really isn't the time. I am the attending physician on record for last night's trauma case. I witnessed Dr. Cross override my clinical authority, refuse standard imaging protocol, and physically assault a member of the nursing staff. I want that on record. Catherine, we're handling the situation internally. Legal is already—" "I don't care what legal is doing. I care about what's right." Holland's voice cracked. "That woman stood up for a patient and got hit in the face for it, and I stood there and let it happen. I'm not letting it happen again." Hayes leaned back. His face tightened. "Think carefully about what you're doing. You've been here 17 years, Catherine. That's a lot to throw away over one incident." "One incident?" Holland's voice went sharp. "Richard Cross has been terrorizing people in this hospital for a decade. Everyone knows it. You know it. The board knows it. HR knows it. We all just kept pretending because he brings in money and his name is on the wall." "Catherine." "No." She stood up. "I'm done being quiet. And if you try to bury this like you buried the others, I'll go to the press myself." She walked out. Hayes sat in his chair for a long time after she left. Then he picked up his phone and called Cross's attorney. "We have another problem," he said. Victor Sands listened. Then he said the words that would echo through every decision made in the next 48 hours. "Then we need to move fast, before this gets bigger than we can contain." He was already too late, because at that exact moment, in the basement of Chicago Memorial Hospital, a 26-year-old nurse named Bridget O'Neill, younger sister of Corporal Patrick O'Neill, KIA Afghanistan, 2011, was standing in front of the door to the server room with a key card she wasn't supposed to have and a flash drive in her pocket. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She'd been at Chicago Memorial for 11 months. She'd seen things, heard things, watched files disappear from the HR system, watched camera feeds get edited after incidents. She'd kept her mouth shut because she needed this job. But last night, she'd watched a man slap a woman across the face and grab her hair and call her a bitch. And she'd watched the hospital put the woman in handcuffs and let the man walk free. And this morning, she'd heard the whispers. They were going to delete the footage, edit it, make it disappear like they'd made everything else disappear. Bridget swiped the key card. The light turned green. She pushed the door open. The server room hummed around her. Rows of black towers blinking with tiny lights. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she knew where the backup drives were. The IT director, Tim Whitfield, had shown her 6 months ago when she'd helped him catalog them. She found the rack, pulled the drive marked with last night's date, plugged in the flash drive. Her fingers were trembling so badly she missed the port twice. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, come on." The transfer bar appeared. 11%, 23%. Footsteps in the hallway. 41%. The footsteps got closer. 67%. The door handle moved. Bridget grabbed the flash drive, yanked it free, shoved it into her scrub pocket just as the door opened. A maintenance worker. He looked at her confused. "You're not supposed to be in here." I was 67% of the truth that Richard Cross and the administration of Chicago Memorial Hospital were planning to erase forever. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. And 20 minutes later, when Bridget O'Neill found Reagan in the medication room and held out the drive with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face, Reagan took it gently, looked the young nurse in the eye, and said 5 words that Bridget would remember for the rest of her life. "You just changed everything, Bridget." Reagan held the flash drive in her palm, felt its weight, not physical weight, something heavier. 11 months of silence, years of buried complaints, careers destroyed, women silenced, all of it compressed into a piece of plastic smaller than her thumb. Bridget stood in front of her, still shaking, still crying, mascara running down both cheeks. "I couldn't get all of it," Bridget said. "The transfer was at 67% when someone came in. I panicked. I pulled it out." 67% is more than anyone else in this hospital has ever had the courage to save. Reagan slipped the drive into her pocket. "Bridget, look at me." Bridget looked up. Her eyes were swollen. "From this moment on, you don't talk about this. Not to anyone. Not to your friends. Not to the nurses you trust. Not on your phone. You go back to your shift and you do your job like nothing happened. Can you do that?" "I'm scared." "You should be. What you just did was dangerous." Reagan's voice was steady, anchoring, but it was also the bravest thing anyone in this building has done in 10 years. "Now I need you to be brave for a little longer. Can you do that for me?" Bridget nodded. She took a breath, straightened her scrubs, walked out of the medication room like a woman carrying a secret that could bring down a kingdom. Reagan found an empty bathroom on the second floor, locked the door, pulled out a phone that wasn't her personal phone, a secure device she'd been issued for the assignment. She dialed a number. "It's Blackwood. I need secure data analysis within 6 hours. I'm sending a partial backup from the hospital's internal server. Incident reports, HR filings, security footage archives, whatever's on here, I need it cataloged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced." The voice on the other end asked one question. "No," Reagan said. "This isn't about the witness. This is about something else. Something that's been happening here long before I arrived." She hung up, plugged the flash drive into the secure phone, hit transfer, waited. While Reagan worked in silence, Richard Cross was working in noise. His office on the 4th floor had become a war room. Victor Sands had arrived at 7 that morning. Hayes had joined them at 8. By noon, they'd added Diane Kruger, a crisis PR consultant with a steel gray bob and a reputation for making scandals disappear before they made headlines. "Here's where we stand," Sands said, pacing in front of Cross's desk. "The nurse hasn't filed a formal complaint yet. The colonel hasn't contacted law enforcement. As far as we know, this is still contained within the hospital." "Then let's keep it that way," Cross said. He was sitting in his leather chair, jacket off, sleeves rolled. His right hand was slightly swollen from where he'd struck Reagan. He kept flexing it unconsciously, like a man testing a weapon he intended to use again. Diane spoke next. "The problem isn't the assault, Richard. The problem is the footage. If that tape gets out, no amount of PR can spin a grown man hitting a woman half his size in a room full of witnesses." "Then we handle the footage," Cross said. Hayes shifted in his seat. He looked like a man sitting on a nail. I've already spoken to IT. The primary footage from the trauma bay cameras has been flagged for review. We can have it reclassified as a system malfunction. Corrupted file. It's been done before. Diane raised an eyebrow. Before? How many times before? Hayes didn't answer. How many times, William? Sands pressed. 3, maybe 4, over the past 6 years. Diane closed her eyes. You've been destroying evidence of prior incidents. Not destroying, reclassifying. There's a legal distinction. There is no legal distinction if a federal investigator pulls your server logs and finds a pattern of altered footage corresponding to complaint dates. Diane's voice was razor sharp. You've created a trail that leads directly to institutional cover-up. Hayes went pale. Cross didn't flinch. Just handle it. That's what I pay all of you for. Make the footage go away, discredit the nurse, and get that military clown out of my hospital. Richard, Sands said carefully, the colonel is a 3-star Marine flag officer. We can't just... I don't care if he's the president. This is my hospital. My name is on the wall. My foundation funds half the beds in this building. Without me, this place closes in 18 months. Everyone in this room knows that. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out over Chicago. So stop acting like I'm the problem and start treating me like what I am. The only thing keeping Chicago Memorial alive. Nobody argued, because on some level, every person in that room knew he was right. Chicago Memorial needed Richard Cross's money, his connections, his reputation. They needed him more than they needed the truth. That calculation had been made years ago, and every day since had been built on top of it, like floors added to a building with a cracked foundation. At 2:15 that afternoon, Hayes called the IT director, Timothy Whitfield, into his office and gave him a direct order. Purge the trauma bay footage from last night. All angles, all backups. Whitfield was 38, married, 2 kids. He'd worked at Chicago Memorial for 7 years, and he'd done things he wasn't proud of. Reclassified files before, looked the other way before. But something about today felt different. Maybe it was the bruise he'd seen on Reagan's face in the hallway that morning. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Not broken, not angry, just certain. Certain in a way that made him feel uncertain about everything he'd been doing. All backups? Whitfield asked. Everything, Tim. System malfunction, corrupted files, same as before. Whitfield stood there for a long moment. And the off-site backup? Hayes blinked. What off-site backup? 6 months ago, the board approved a redundant backup system. Everything automatically mirrors to a secure cloud server. It was in the IT budget report, page 14. Hayes' face changed color. Can you delete from the cloud? I can, but it'll leave a deletion log, time-stamped, with my credentials attached. Then find a way to do it without a log. That's not possible, sir. The system was designed specifically to prevent unauthorized deletion. That's the whole point of redundant backup. Hayes put both hands flat on his desk. Tim, I need you to understand what's at stake here. I understand perfectly, Mr. Hayes. Whitfield's voice was steady. You're asking me to destroy evidence of an assault. If that comes out, and with a Marine colonel involved, it will come out, I lose my career, my certifications, and possibly my freedom. I have 2 children. My daughter is 4. Nobody is going to find out. With respect, sir, you don't know that. You can't guarantee that, and I'm not willing to bet my family's future on it. He turned to the door. Tim, Whitfield stopped, didn't turn around. If you walk out of this office without handling this, you're fired. Then I'll submit my resignation, but I'm not deleting those files. He walked out. Whitfield walked straight to the parking garage, sat in his car, pulled out his personal phone, not the hospital-issued one they could monitor. He had Reagan's number. Whitfield had made it his business to know who the real players were in this building. And that quiet nurse in the ER, she moved like someone with training. spoke like someone with authority she was hiding. He dialed. "This is Emma. Ms. Carter, Tim Whitfield, IT director. We've never formally met, but I need you to know something. Hayes just ordered me to delete evidence. I refused. I'm resigning effective immediately. But before I go, you should know, there's an off-site cloud backup they don't know I can access. Complete, untouched, and I'm giving you the credentials." Silence on the line. "Why?" Reagan asked. "Because I have a daughter, and I don't want her growing up in a world where men like Cross get away with this, because people like me look the other way." He gave her the access codes. Then he hung up and drove home, not knowing he'd just shifted the entire war. Hayes sat alone in his office, stared at his desk. For the first time, he realized the machine he'd been operating for years had just lost a critical gear. He picked up his phone, called Cross. "We have a problem with the cloud backup. Whitfield won't touch it." "Then fire him and find someone who will." Richard, firing the IT director the day after an assault incident creates a paper trail that, "I don't care about paper trails. Get it done." Hayes hung up. His hands were trembling. He opened his desk drawer, pulled out a bottle of antacids, chewed 3 tablets. Then he called a private IT contractor he'd used once before. A man who worked outside the system and didn't ask questions. The contractor answered at 3:45. He said he could be at the hospital by 6. Hayes gave him the access codes. At 4:12, Reagan received the analysis from her secure contact. She was in a storage closet on the 3rd floor, door locked, reading on her phone screen. The 67% Bridget had pulled from the server was devastating, not just for Cross, for the entire institution. 14 separate incident reports filed against Richard Cross over a 9-year period. 12 of those reports marked as resolved without investigation. 2 reclassified as employee performance issues, meaning the victims had been blamed for their own complaints. 3 non-disclosure agreements, each one paid out through a discretionary fund that didn't appear in the hospital's public financial disclosures. Email threads between Hayes and the HR director discussing how to manage a complaint from a surgical resident named Dr. Amy Watkins. She'd accused Cross of cornering her in an on-call room. The emails discussed transferring Watkins to a rural affiliate hospital. One line from Hayes read, "She needs to be somewhere she can't cause problems." Reagan read every file, every email, every buried report, and she felt something she hadn't felt since combat, a cold, focused fury that didn't shake her hands or raise her pulse. It sharpened her. She called Kane at 4:30. "I have evidence of systematic cover-up, 14 buried complaints, 3 illegal NDAs, altered security footage on at least 4 prior occasions, and they're planning to destroy the footage from last night." "How solid is the evidence?" 67% of a server backup, fragments, but the fragments include emails, internal memos, and HR records that establish a clear pattern. Can it hold up in court? It can hold up in the press, and once it's public, the courts will follow. Kane was quiet for 5 seconds. "What do you need?" "I need the remaining 33%. They're going to purge the servers tonight, I'm sure of it. If I can get the full backup before they do, we have everything." "That's a risk, Reagan." "So is walking away." 48 hours. That was the deal. "I know. I'm not asking for more time. I'm asking for permission to finish what I started." Kane exhaled. "You have it, but Reagan, be careful. These people have been covering their tracks for years. Cornered animals are the most dangerous kind." "I know, sir. I've hunted a few." She hung up. At 5:58, Reagan found Bridget in the staff parking garage, sitting in her car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. Engine off. Reagan knocked on the window. Bridget jumped, then saw who it was and unlocked the door. "I need your help one more time," Reagan said. Bridget's face went white. "Reagan, I can't go back in there. If they catch me..." "They won't catch you. Because you're not going in alone. What do you mean? At 6, a private IT contractor is going to enter the hospital through the service entrance. Hayes hired him to purge the cloud backup. The footage from last night and everything connected to it. I know this because Tim Whitfield refused to do it and told me directly. Bridget stared at her. Whitfield talked to you? Whitfield is a good man who's been trapped in a bad system. He came to me an hour ago, told me everything. The purge is scheduled for tonight. So what do? The contractor needs access to the server room. Same room you were in this morning. He'll need about 40 minutes to locate and delete the cloud backup credentials. During those 40 minutes, I need someone to mirror the complete backup to an external drive before he can touch it. You need me to do it? I need you to do it. Bridget gripped the wheel harder. I'm not trained for this, Reagan. I'm a nurse. I change bandages. I take vitals. I'm not some kind of... Bridget. Reagan's voice was steady. What you did this morning was harder than anything I'm asking you to do tonight. You walked into that room alone, terrified, with no training and no backup. And you got the evidence. Tonight, I'll be right there with you. Every second. You won't be alone. Bridget looked at her, tears building again. Why me? Because you work here. You know the system. You have access. And because when this is over, when it goes public, it can't just be the military officer who brought it down. It has to be someone from this hospital, someone who works here, someone the other nurses can look at and say, she was one of us, and she did the right thing. Bridget was quiet for a long time. The parking garage was empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My brother died in Afghanistan, Bridget said quietly. Patrick, Corporal Patrick O'Neill, IED outside Kandahar, 2011. Reagan waited. Blackstone Defense Group was his convoy security, private contractors. They were supposed to protect the supply trucks. Bridget's voice cracked. When the IED hit, the contractors ran, left the Marines to fight alone. Patrick bled out, waiting for medevac that came too late. She looked at Reagan. Richard Cross built his company on contracts like that, on men like my brother, who died because his people cared more about profit than protection. Reagan understood now. This wasn't just about last night. This was about justice that had been waiting 14 years. Okay, Bridget whispered. Okay, I'll do it. At 6:22, a man in a gray jacket carrying a black laptop bag entered Chicago Memorial through the loading dock. No badge, no visitor pass. Hayes had left a service key card taped under the fire extinguisher box on the B-level corridor, exactly as arranged. The contractor retrieved it, swiped through 2 doors, headed for the server room. At 6:24, Reagan and Bridget entered the same corridor from the opposite end. Reagan was pushing a supply cart, the perfect cover. Nobody questioned nurses with supply carts. They were invisible. They reached the server room door at 6:27. Reagan pressed her ear to it. She could hear the contractor inside, the click of keys, the hum of a laptop booting up. He's already in, Reagan whispered. He'll need to interface with the main terminal to access cloud credentials. That'll take him at least 15 minutes. We go in through the auxiliary access point. The what? Bridget's voice was barely audible. The ventilation access panel. Whitfield told me the server room has a secondary access for maintenance. Unlocked panel on the east wall of the adjacent storage room. Opens directly behind the backup rack. Bridget looked like she might be sick. We're going through a wall? We're going through a panel, 3 feet wide. I've been through smaller. They moved into the storage room. Reagan found the panel, unlatched it silently, eased it open. The server room hummed on the other side. Through the gap, she could see the contractor's back. He was seated at the main terminal, headphones on, typing. Reagan slipped through first, silent as smoke. Bridget followed, gripping Reagan's hands so hard her knuckles cracked. They reached the backup rack. Reagan located the correct drive, the same one Bridget had pulled from that morning, now holding the complete data set including the cloud-synced files. She plugged in a military-grade external drive, the kind that could survive a firefight. Transfer initiated. 8%, 15%. The contractor shifted in his chair, coughed, kept typing. 31%. Bridget's breathing was too loud. Reagan placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezed once. Calm down. You're okay. I'm here. 44%. The contractor stood up. Bridget froze. Reagan didn't move a muscle. He walked to a shelf on the far side of the room, grabbed a cable, sat back down. 58%. Reagan watched the bar move. Every second was a year. 73%. The contractor typed something, paused, typed again. Then he said out loud to no one, "Cloud credentials locked, need to run override." He was getting closer to deleting the backup, closer to erasing everything. 86%. The contractor's screen flashed. He leaned forward. 92%. Got it, he muttered. Running purge now. 97%. 99%. 100. Reagan pulled the drive, slipped it into her pocket, grabbed Bridget's hand. They moved back through the panel, through the storage room, into the hallway before the contractor ever turned around. They made it to the stairwell. Bridget collapsed against the wall, hands on her knees, gasping. "Did we get it?" Bridget breathed. Reagan held up the drive. "We got everything." "Oh my God." Bridget slid down the wall to the floor. "Oh my God. Oh my God." "Bridget, look at me." Bridget looked up, tears and sweat streaming down her face. "It's done. The hard part is over. Now comes the part where the truth does the work." "What happens now?" Reagan pocketed the drive. "Now I make a phone call, and then Richard Cross finds out what it feels like to be the one who can't make it go away." At 7:45 that evening, while the contractor was packing up his laptop and reporting to Hayes that the cloud backup had been successfully purged, Reagan sat in the Navy liaison office 3 blocks from the hospital. Across from her sat Colonel Kane. Between them, on a steel table, sat the external drive containing the complete backup of Chicago Memorial's internal records. "Everything's on there," Reagan said. "Every complaint, every buried report, every altered file, every NDA, every email between Hayes and HR about silencing victims. 9 years of institutional cover-up, documented by their own system." Kane picked up the drive, turned it over in his hand. "And the footage from last night? Full resolution, all 4 camera angles, audio included. The audio picks up what he said to me. Every word." Kane set the drive down. He looked at Reagan for a long moment. "This goes public, there's no taking it back. For Cross, for the hospital, for you, your name, your face, your service record. All of it becomes part of the story." "I know. You were supposed to be invisible, Major. That was the whole point of the assignment." "The assignment was to protect a life, sir. I protected more than one." Kane nodded slowly. Then he picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to the Department of Defense Inspector General. The second was to a contact at the Associated Press. The clock on the wall read 8:03. Richard Cross was at home by then, in his lakefront condo, drinking scotch, watching the evening news. Convinced that by morning the footage would be gone, the nurse would be discredited, and his world would remain exactly as it had always been. He had no idea that in less than 10 hours, every screen in America would show his face, and the sound of his hand hitting Reagan's cheek would be the only thing anyone remembered about his name. Part 3. The Fall. The video hit the internet at 6:14 Saturday morning. Not a leak, not a rumor, not a second-hand account. The raw, unedited, 4-angle security footage from Chicago Memorial's Trauma Bay 2. Time-stamped, complete with audio so clear you could hear the crack of skin on skin. The Associated Press ran it first. Within 11 minutes, every major network had picked it up. By 6:45, it was the #1 trending topic in the United States. By 7:15, it was global. The footage showed everything. Cross-stepping toward Reagan, Reagan standing her ground, his hand rising, the slap that snapped her head sideways, his fist closing around her hair, his mouth forming the words that no amount of lawyers or PR consultants or money could ever take back. "Shut up, bitch. Know your place." And then it showed what came after. Reagan wiping the blood from her mouth, stepping between Cross and the dying patient, restraining him with a single, controlled motion. The team finally moving, finally acting, rushing the patient to imaging that saved his life. 23 million views in the first 2 hours. Richard Cross woke up at 7:22 to the sound of his phone buzzing off his nightstand. He reached for it, groggy, squinting. 43 missed calls, over 200 text messages. He opened the first text from Victor Sands. It contained 2 words, "Call me." He called. Sands answered before the first ring finished. "Richard, the footage is out." Cross sat up. "That's impossible. Hayes had it purged last night. The contractor confirmed." "I don't care what the contractor confirmed. I'm watching you hit a woman on CNN right now. It's everywhere, Richard. Every network, every platform. Your face is on every screen in this country." Cross's blood went cold, genuinely cold. He could feel it draining from his face like someone had pulled a plug. How? How is this possible? "I don't know how, but the footage is crystal clear. 4 angles, full audio. There's no disputing it. There's no spinning it. And Richard, there's more." "What do you mean, more?" "The AP isn't just running the video. They're running a full investigative piece. Internal emails, HR complaints dating back 9 years, NDA payouts from a discretionary fund. They have everything." Cross stood up. His legs barely held him. "That's privileged hospital information. That's protected. We'll sue for—" "Richard, listen to me very carefully. You are going to be arrested today. Not next week. Not after an investigation. Today. I've already gotten calls from 2 contacts at the state attorney's office. They're convening an emergency session this morning. The assault is on camera. The cover-up is documented. And the woman you hit is an active-duty Marine, which means the federal government has every reason to make an example out of this." Cross felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Victor, You need to come to my office right now. Do not speak to anyone. Do not answer your phone. Do not turn on your television. Right now, Richard." Cross hung up. He stood in his bedroom, barefoot, staring at the wall. His hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't rage. This time it was something Richard Cross had never allowed himself to feel. Something he had spent his entire career making other people feel instead. Fear. At 8 o'clock that morning, Chicago Memorial's lobby was already surrounded. News vans lined the street. Reporters stood on the sidewalk with cameras and microphones. Helicopters circled overhead. The footage was playing on a loop on every screen in every waiting room in the building. Because someone, nobody would ever figure out who, had changed the input on the lobby televisions to the CNN live feed. The staff walked into work through a gauntlet of cameras and shouted questions. "Did you know about the abuse? How long has this been going on? Were you in the room when it happened?" Patricia Williams came through the staff entrance with her head down and her jaw locked. She didn't answer a single question. But when she reached the nurse's station, she stopped and stared at the television mounted above the desk. The footage was playing. The slap, the grab, the words. Patricia watched it 3 times without blinking. Then she sat down heavily in a chair, put her face in her hands, and said something nobody had ever heard Patricia Williams say. "God forgive me. I saw it happen, and I did nothing." Jason Cole was already at the hospital. He'd arrived at 6:30 before the media. He'd watched the footage on his phone in the parking lot, sitting in his car, crying so hard he couldn't breathe. He kept replaying the moment, the slap, Reagan's head snapping sideways, and him standing there, mouth open, arms at his sides, doing absolutely nothing. He'd gone into medicine to help people, and in the moment it mattered most, he'd been a statue. He found Reagan at 8:15. She was in the medication room, drawing up medication into a syringe. Her bruise had turned dark purple overnight. She looked exhausted, but her hands were steady. "The whole world is watching," Jason said from the doorway. "The whole world was always watching, Jason. They just didn't have the footage before." "What's going to happen?" Reagan capped the syringe. "The truth is going to happen, and it's going to be loud, and it's going to be messy, and a lot of people in this building are going to be scared. But when it's over, this place will be better." And Cross made his choices. Every day for 10 years he made his choices. Now the consequences make theirs. Jason stood there for a moment, processing. Then he said something that surprised them both. "I want to make a statement, a formal one, to whoever's investigating. I was in that room. I saw everything. I want it on record." Reagan looked at him, really looked at him. And for just a second, her composure cracked. Not from pain, from something much rarer. Pride. Pride in someone she barely knew choosing to be brave when bravery cost something. "You're going to make a hell of a doctor, Jason Cole," she said. At 9:12, the hospital's board of directors convened an emergency meeting. 20 members, most of them in their 60s and 70s. Men and women who had sat on this board for years, collecting their fees and signing their approvals without ever looking too closely at what was happening beneath them. They gathered around a long conference table, and for the first time in memory, not one of them was smiling. Board Chairman Richard Calloway, 71, opened the meeting with a voice that cracked on the first sentence. "I assume everyone has seen the footage." Silence. Then nods, slow, heavy nods. The AP piece names the hospital directly. It references internal documents, emails, HR records, financial disclosures that were supposed to be confidential. "I've been fielding calls since 6 this morning. 3 of our largest donors have already pulled their commitments. The governor's office called. The state attorney's office called. And 15 minutes ago, I received formal notice from the Department of Justice indicating that Chicago Memorial Hospital is now the subject of a federal investigation." A woman at the far end of the table, board member Patricia Owens, spoke first. "Where is Hayes?" "Hayes resigned 40 minutes ago. By email. He's not returning calls." "And Cross?" "His attorney informed us at 8:30 that Dr. Cross will not be appearing at the hospital today." Patricia leaned forward. "He's running. He's lawyering up," Calloway corrected. "Same thing." At 11:20, 2 unmarked cars pulled up to the law offices of Sands and Associates on Michigan Avenue. 4 plainclothes detectives from the Chicago Police Department walked through the glass doors and asked to speak with Richard Cross. Sands met them in the lobby. "My client is prepared to cooperate, but I need to see the warrant first." The lead detective, Sergeant Maria Torres, handed over the paperwork. Sands read it twice. His face didn't change, but his hand tightened on the pages. Assault and battery, obstruction of justice, intimidation of a federal officer, conspiracy to destroy evidence. He looked up. "Conspiracy? That's a reach. Your client ordered the destruction of security footage documenting his own assault on a military service member. The hospital administrator who facilitated it has already been interviewed. He's cooperating." Sands's expression shifted. "Hayes is cooperating?" "Sang like a bird about 40 minutes ago. Turns out when you offer a man a choice between 5 years in federal prison and a cooperation agreement, he finds his voice real quick." Sands set the warrant down. "Give me 5 minutes with my client." He walked into the back office where Cross was sitting. The surgeon looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. The confidence, the polish, the armor of authority, all of it was gone. What sat in that chair was just a A man who had spent decades building a fortress out of fear and money and silence, and was now watching it crumble in real time. "They're here," Sands said. "I heard. Richard, the charges are serious." Hayes flipped. "He's giving them everything. The footage deletions, the buried complaints, the NDAs, all of it. Your best option right now is to surrender peacefully, post bail, and prepare for trial." Cross stared at his hands. The right one was still slightly swollen. "I built that hospital, Victor. I gave them 20 years. I saved thousands of lives. And they're going to arrest me because of one nurse who couldn't keep her mouth shut. Richard, she's not just a nurse. She never was. She was in my hospital, in my ER. She challenged me in front of my team. She saved a patient's life. That's not the point. It is exactly the point. And it's the point that every jury in this country is going to hear. You overrode a correct medical decision out of ego. You struck a woman for being right, and she still saved the patient. That's the story, Richard, and there is no version of it where you're the hero." Cross said nothing. "It's time to go," Sands said. Richard Cross stood up, straightened his shirt, ran a hand through his hair, and walked out to meet the detectives. They cuffed him in the lobby, hands behind his back, metal on wrists. The same cold steel that had been on Reagan's wrist 2 nights ago. The same sound, the same click. Sands had arranged for a private exit, but someone had tipped off the press. When the detectives walked Cross through the front door, there were 40 cameras waiting. The flashbulbs hit his face like physical blows. Questions came from every direction. He kept his head down, his jaw clenched, his eyes wet. The image went viral in minutes. The mighty Dr. Richard Cross, the untouchable chief of surgery, the man who told a woman to know her place. Walking out of his lawyer's office in handcuffs. Back at Chicago Memorial, Reagan watched the arrest on the television in the break room. She stood with her arms at her sides, coffee untouched, face unreadable. Dr. Catherine Holland stood next to her. Patricia Williams was behind them. Jason Cole leaned against the doorframe. Bridget O'Neill sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of water she kept forgetting to drink. Nobody spoke for a long time. Holland broke the silence. "It's really happening." "It's happening," Reagan said. Patricia's voice came from behind them, rough, unsteady. "I owe you an apology, Blackwood. I owe you more than that. I watched him hit you and I didn't move. I've watched him do things in this hospital for years, and I never said a word. I told myself I was protecting my job, my pension, my family, but I was protecting myself, and I let other people pay the price." Reagan turned around. Patricia's face was raw. No makeup, no armor, just a woman who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally set it down. "Patricia, you're not the villain of this story. The system made speaking up feel impossible. It was designed to. Cross and the people who protected him built a machine that punished anyone who told the truth. You survived inside that machine. That's not something to be ashamed of. But you didn't just survive, you fought. I had training you didn't have. I had backup. I had a 3-star colonel on speed dial. You didn't have any of that. And still, right now, today, you're standing in this room saying these words out loud. That matters. That counts." Patricia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She nodded once. Then she said something that surprised everyone in that room, including herself. "What do we do now? How do we fix this place?" Reagan looked at her, then at Holland, then at Jason, then at Bridget, who was already crying quietly at the table. "We start by telling the truth, all of it, not just about Cross, about everything. The complaints that were buried, the people who were silenced, the systems that failed. We tell the truth and then we build something better. Not perfect, better." "Who's going to listen?" Jason asked. "Everyone. Right now the whole world is watching this hospital. That's not a curse, it's an opportunity. Every policy that gets rewritten, every protection that gets installed, every voice that gets heard, it all starts with this moment, right here, right now. The hours between Cross's arrest and 1 o'clock that afternoon moved like a slow avalanche. At first, just small shifts. A nurse speaking up in rounds about a pattern she'd noticed. A resident questioning an unsafe protocol without fear. The security footage playing on loop in the lobby, impossible to ignore. Then the momentum built. By 11, the hospital's main phone line was jammed. By noon, the board had emergency installed a dedicated anonymous reporting system. By 12:30, the first email came in. Then the second. Then a handwritten letter delivered by courier. Each one a crack in the dam. Each one proof that silence, once broken, creates a flood. At 1:15 that afternoon, something happened that would change everything. Not just for Chicago Memorial, but for every hospital that had ever buried a complaint or silenced a victim or protected a predator because his name was on the wall. The anonymous tip line that the board had set up just hours earlier began to ring. The first call came in at 1:22, a woman's voice shaking, barely above a whisper. My name is Dr. Amy Watkins. 3 years ago, Richard Cross cornered me in an on-call room and put his hands on me. I reported it to HR. They transferred me to a rural clinic 70 miles outside the city. I was told if I spoke publicly, I'd never practice medicine in Illinois again. I have the original complaint, I have the transfer letter, and I have the voicemail from the HR director telling me to keep my mouth shut. The second call came 14 minutes later. Danielle Reeves, a former scrub nurse, Patricia's niece, though nobody in administration had ever made the connection. She'd worked at Chicago Memorial for 2 years before being quietly terminated after she refused to retract a harassment complaint against Cross. I filed a formal complaint, Danielle said. They told me the investigation found insufficient evidence. 2 weeks later, I was let go for performance issues. My performance reviews for the previous 2 years were all above average. I have copies of everything. The third call, the fourth, the fifth. By 9 o'clock that night, the tip line had received 19 calls. 19 voices that had been buried, silenced, threatened, or erased. Each one carrying documentation, emails, letters, recordings, complaint forms that had been hidden in desk drawers, in shoeboxes, and encrypted folders for years, waiting for a moment that felt safe enough to speak. And with each call, the picture of what Chicago Memorial had really been became clearer, uglier, more undeniable. Reagan was still at the hospital when the sun went down. She'd worked her full shift, cared for her patients, checked on Brennan, who would be transferred to a military medical facility in the morning under heavy security. She walked through the ER one last time. The place looked different than it had 72 hours ago. Not the building, the people. They moved differently, talked differently, like something that had been pressing down on them for years had finally lifted. Kane was waiting for her in the parking garage, leaning against his car, in civilian clothes now. It's done, he said. Not yet. Cross still has to face trial. The hospital still has to implement reforms. The other victims still need justice. I meant your part is done, Major. Brennan's being transferred at 0600. Your assignment is complete. Reagan looked back at the hospital, at the lights burning in the windows, at the people inside who were just beginning to understand that change was possible. Permission to stay one more day, sir. There's someone I need to see first. Kane studied her face, then nodded. Granted. The next morning, Reagan didn't go to the hospital. She drove north, out of Chicago, into the suburbs, to a memory care facility in Naperville. Her mother was in the garden, sitting on a bench, watching birds at a feeder. Reagan sat down beside her. Hi, Mom. Helen Blackwood looked at her daughter. The bruise on her face was fading but still visible. Her mother reached out, touched it gently. Someone hurt you. Someone tried to. Did you stop them? I did what Dad would have done. I stood my ground. Her mother's eyes cleared, one of those rare moments of lucidity. Your father stood his ground too, and it got him killed, baby. I know, but he died protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. And because of him, other people lived. That mattered, Mom. His life mattered. And yours? Does your life matter? Reagan took her mother's hand. It matters because I choose to make it matter. Every person I protect, every truth I bring to light, every system I help break. That's how I honor him. That's how I honor you. Her mother squeezed her hand. He'd be so proud of you, so proud. They sat together in the garden as the sun rose higher. And for the first time in years, Reagan felt something she'd almost forgotten. Peace. 2 days later, Reagan stood in Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60, the newer graves, the ones that still had flowers every week. She wasn't there for her father's grave. She was there because Kane had asked her to come. She found him standing in front of a simple white headstone, Marine Corps emblem, Corporal Daniel Reeves, KIA Beirut, Lebanon, October 23, 1983. He was 20 years old, Kane said without turning around. I pulled him out of the rubble, held him while he died. He kept asking for his mother. I told him she'd be proud. I don't know if he heard me. Reagan stood beside him, said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only thing that fit. I've been coming here for 42 years, Kane continued, every October 23rd, telling him I'm sorry, that I should have stopped that truck, that I should have saved more of them. You saved who you could, sir. I know that now. Kane looked at her. His eyes were wet. You taught me that, watching you in Chicago. You made the same choice I made in Beirut. You chose the patient over the mission, the person over the protocol, and you didn't carry guilt for it. You carried purpose. He reached out, put a hand on her shoulder. Your father would be proud, Reagan, not just of what you did in that hospital, of who you are, a warrior who fights for people, not just causes. That's the rarest kind. Reagan felt her throat tighten. So would Corporal Reeves be proud of you, sir? You trained a generation of Marines to make the right call in the worst moments. That's your legacy. Kane looked back at the headstone. Maybe it's time I believed that. They stood together in silence. Two warriors, two survivors, two people who'd learned that some debts can't be repaid, only honored. And that sometimes the only way to live with the past is to make damn sure the future means something. Kane saluted the grave. Reagan saluted beside him. Then they walked away together, two ghosts no longer haunted, heading toward whatever came next. 6 weeks later, Michael Brennan testified before a federal grand jury. The testimony lasted 3 days. By the time he finished, not only was Cross's cartel pipeline exposed, but 14 Pentagon officers, 2 senators, and the CEOs of 3 other private military contractors faced indictment. Brennan entered witness protection under a new identity. Before he left, he sent Reagan a single message through Kane. You kept your word. Your father would be proud. Reagan never responded. She didn't need to. The mission had always been the mission, and the mission was complete. 3 weeks after that, Richard Cross was indicted on 14 counts. His medical license was permanently revoked. His assets were frozen pending civil litigation from 9 former employees who came forward in the weeks following the video's release. William Hayes pleaded guilty to obstruction and received a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation. 3 board members resigned. 2 faced separate investigations for financial misconduct related to the hidden NDA fund. Chicago Memorial Hospital survived. Barely. But it survived because the people inside it refused to let it die. They tore out the rot. They rewrote the policies. They installed anonymous reporting systems, independent oversight committees, and mandatory accountability training for every employee from the janitor to the chief of medicine. Patricia Williams became the head of the new Workplace Safety Committee. She ran it the way she ran her shifts. No nonsense, no exceptions. No one above the rules. Dr. Catherine Holland was promoted to Chief of Emergency Medicine. She accepted on one condition, that every complaint filed in her department would be investigated by an independent third party, never by internal HR alone. Jason Cole finished his residency and stayed at Chicago Memorial. He became known as the resident who asked questions out loud, who challenged unsafe calls, who never let a patient suffer because he was afraid to speak. Other residents started doing the same, not because anyone told them to, because they watched Jason do it and realized it was possible. Bridget O'Neill was offered a full scholarship by a medical foundation that heard her story. She accepted. She enrolled in an advanced nursing program while continuing to work part-time at Chicago Memorial. She kept the flash drive in her desk drawer at home. Never forgot how her hands shook when she plugged it in. Never forgot how it felt to carry the truth in her pocket and choose not to let it be destroyed. And Reagan Blackwood, Major Reagan Blackwood, United States Marine Corps, was never seen at Chicago Memorial again. No farewell party, no plaque on the wall, no ceremony. She disappeared the way she arrived, quietly, without fanfare, like someone whose purpose was never to be remembered, but to make remembering possible for others. But if you walk through the ER at Chicago Memorial on any given Tuesday night, past the nurses' station, past the trauma bays, past the break room where people now talk openly about things they once whispered, you might notice something. A small photograph in a simple frame mounted on the wall near the medication room. A woman in marine dress blues, blonde hair, blue eyes. The caption reads, Major Reagan Blackwood, for those who speak when silence is easier. Nobody explained it to new staff. They didn't need to, because someone always told the story of a quiet woman in light blue scrubs who walked into a broken place, took a blow meant to silence her, and refused to fall, who saved a patient, exposed a predator, and proved something that every nurse, every doctor, every person who has ever been told to shut up and know their place needs to hear. Silence is not submission. Calm is not weakness. And some warriors don't wear uniforms to war. They wear scrubs. And they save lives in ways that can't always be measured in heartbeats and blood pressure. Sometimes they save lives by refusing to let evil hide in the quiet. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the world is a woman who has already lost everything and has nothing left to fear. And sometimes the mission really is always people. All of them. Every single one.